they are like my.
The determination was made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this board. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, the meeting materials were posted 1 week in advance. A recording of this meeting will be provided and linked on our website, and all votes will be taken by roll call, of which I will segue into you, Aaron, to call the roll.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Mayor Bennett?
Present.
Mayor Darch?
Present.
Nina Edemudia? Mayor Rodering?
Present.
Ann Sheehan?
Present.
Leanne Rudden?
Present.
Frank Beal?
Present.
Paul Goodrich?
Present.
Mayor Noak?
Present.
Stefan Schaefer?
Present.
Matt Walsh?
Present.
Dr. Mahammadian? President Brawley? Jim Healy?
Jim Healy's present.
President Reinbold?
Present.
Carolyn Schofield?
Here.
And Diane Williams.
Present.
And next time I'll actually read that in the right order. My apologies, I went down and supposed to cross.
No problem.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. And first, I'd like to make a couple announcements. We are glad to welcome Paul Goodrich and Nina Idumadi, appointed by the City of Chicago to the board. Paul has 25 years of senior banking experience in the private sector and is serving as a chief operating officer for Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Nina fills an unexpired term of Maurice Cox, who resigned in July. She is a certified planner specializing in equitable community development and serves as an assistant commissioner for the City of Chicago Department of Planning and Development. Paul, Nina, please say hello. I don't know if Nina's on, right?
I'm not sure if Nina's on. Hello, very happy to be here. I have a little bit of experience with CMAP over the past year, helping out with the recovery task force. So I've seen all the good work and excited to be part of it now. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome aboard. First item on the agenda is the minutes of the June meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Again, state your name.
Moved by Healy.
Second by Noak.
Healy.
Moved and seconded. Aaron, call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett.
Yes.
Frank Beal?
Yes.
President Brawley? Mayor Darch?
Yes.
Paul Goodrich?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
Aye.
And I believe Nina Edemudia has joined. Nina, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Noak?
Yes.
President Reinbold?
Yes.
Mayor Rodering?
Yes.
Stefan Schaefer?
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Ann Sheehan?
Yes.
Matt Walsh?
Yes.
And Diane Williams.
Yes.
The motion carries. First item on the agenda is the executive director's report. Aaron.
Thank you. So I've got a few items to update the board on. Over the last several months, CMAP leadership and staff have been working on a series of strategic planning workshops to define our vision and mission statement for the agency. We set a number of goals and objectives and expected outcomes that will guide our agency's work in advancing onto 2050 over the next 5 years. I really want to thank all our board members for your participation and making time to provide guidance and feedback on this process. Your insights have really helped us as we've continued to shape this plan. So our vision of an inclusive and thriving region really articulates our aspiration for our agency, our constituents, the region. It serves to inspire us to a greater purpose and shape really how we can be more meaningful and intentional in the work that we do. So any decisions that we make moving forward really requires us to be thoughtful and challenges us to ask, how will this decision, this action, this plan, this project move us closer to this vision of an inclusive and thriving region? Our mission statement: to serve people of the region by driving innovation, fostering shared action, and advancing towards a common vision, clearly describes our approach to achieving that vision of an inclusive and thriving region. 2050 really sets the stage for us to support our region, Northeastern Illinois, to become the best place across the country here. But just as our vision informs our decisions, our actions, our plan, and our mission statement specifically helps us refine our goals and reminds us of our specific value proposition. And I'll just ask if you're not muted, if you wouldn't mind muting, I'm getting a little feedback. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. When we developed the vision and mission statement, we intentionally incorporated our core values of serving with passion, pursuing equity, fostering collaboration, leading with excellence, and driving innovation. So those will continue to be our core values to guide our work. My memo that was attached in the agenda, the meeting invite here, has a few more details regarding our small group discussions that we had over the summer. Also, since our last meeting, I've been busy attending some events out in the region. I've enjoyed seeing our team continue to advance our important initiatives. In July, I was able to join with Congresswoman Newman, who invited me to sit down with Secretary Pete Buttigieg and talk about our region's infrastructure needs. I was able to go out to the Bedford Park CSX facility, where I was joined by state, federal, and local officials and our rail partners. Really, my role was to emphasize the need for how our region is planning for a sustainable future, that we're investing in clean transit here in the region. We want to support our environment. We want to make our freight network more efficient, reduce greenhouse gases, and really through some of the investments that we've made in our CMAP, our Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, we're doing just that, and at the same time increasing access to good paying jobs across our region. We talked about the CREATE partnership and how important it is to advancing our transportation investments here that help make our region the nation's freight hub. And talked a lot about how our federal partners, how supportive we are as a region of the role that our federal partners have begun to sort of, the policies they've begun to advance related to equity and really thinking about how transportation has an impact on our air quality here and across the country. During his visit, Secretary Buttigieg, of course, talked about the need for a surface transportation reauthorization bill. We know that the House and the Senate have passed their own versions of the bill, but that the Senate version is the consensus bill moving forward. Tim will give you an overview of the bill later in the meeting. We'll share what we can expect and what we should prepare for, knock on wood, should the bill pass here. Also wanted to share that we've been continuing to share with our local government network here across the region opportunities from our state partners at DCEO to make sure that every community eligible across our region can access their COVID relief funds from the American Rescue Plan. We have been using this network, so we've assigned each of our staff here. We have a little over 100 staff, a handful of communities to connect with on a regular basis. And making sure that we're contacting those municipalities that are eligible for non-entitlement unity COVID relief funding, which is administered through the state. We've also focused on those communities who've not yet accessed the state's portal to make sure that they're getting these notices and that they know this funding is available for them. So the deadline for non-entitlement units to request funds from the state is September 30th. Thought I'd also just update you. I'm sure many of you have heard already that the Surface Transportation Board made a decision on the voting trust. Earlier this year, we sent a letter to the STB requesting more information be shared with the region and impacted stakeholders on the Canadian National proposed acquisition of the Kansas City Southern line. Just as a follow-up here, last week, the STB unanimously decided that allowing the voting trust for their merger would not be in the public interest, and there was high risk it would harm the competition because of the amount of overlap in the Canadian National and the Kansas City Southern's rail network that exists today. So, you know, that this was a new rule that was put in place. It's the first time this has happened since the 2001 merger rules were established. And so it's unlikely that that merger will proceed. However, there still is another proposal on the table from the Canadian Pacific to merge with the Kansas City Southern. So we'll continue to stay apprised of that and make sure the board is aware. Just a couple other notes from me. You'll hear a little bit later on about the FLIP program. I'm so excited for Michelle and Courtney to share. It's the 13th year we've had this program, and it's been just as meaningful as the first year. You know, when we talk about the planning field and the transportation planning field and how we need to make sure that we are being inclusive and really thinking about our pipeline of students, this is an opportunity for young people to understand that there is a career in planning and transportation and related fields here. So you'll hear more about that. I won't steal their fun thunder. And then I think the last two notes that I have are on ADA transition plans, which you'll hear more about at our joint meeting with the MPO Policy Committee next month. But July 31st was the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. As the MPO, CMAP must certify that communities across our region are meeting the federal rules and regulations, including ADA compliance. You know, ADA transition plans have been required for some time now, but up until recently, we didn't have a good handle on who was compliant and who wasn't. And a recent report from the Metropolitan Planning Council highlighted that nearly 180 communities in our region have not developed ADA transition plans. So we're falling far short of this federal mandate. And we want to be able to use our expertise here at CMAP to be able to help communities with limited resources develop and implement these ADA transition plans. We're committed to working with our partners and have been having discussions with IDOT, with FHWA to develop a program that supports our local governments and help implement these accessibility improvements. So these improvements help everyone create a more inclusive region. So you'll be hearing more about this in the coming months about the program we're developing. It will be a multi-year, multifaceted program where we want to really support our region coming into compliance here so we can continue to receive federal funds for transportation projects across the region. And then my last note is really the state of the region reminder here is that we are excited, even though 2021 has sort of had its fits and starts here. We are excited to share with you all the hard work being done to advance our regional goals here in the 2050 plan. So we are holding a celebration. It will be virtual, but if you haven't done so, please save the date and RSVP for October 2nd, 7th. State of the Region event. We will be recognizing community partners for the work that they've been doing to advance a more inclusive and thriving region. We have a keynote address from Dr. Suzette McKinney, who was formerly the executive director of the Illinois Medical District, working in a key area of leadership for our region in terms of life sciences. She's now at Sterling Bay. So anyone can visit the State of the Region page on our website to sign up. Feel free to share it with others, and we look forward to welcoming planning leaders and policymakers and residents to join us as we celebrate the work that we've done to advance the 2050 plan. That concludes my report, Mayor Bennett.
Thank you. Questions of Aaron regarding those topics? Aaron, just real quick on the ADA compliance, is that a boilerplate type thing, or is each town customized?
So each town is required to do customized, right? You're really supposed to be looking at your assets and your funding available and determining how you're going to set forth sort of a plan for accomplishing ADA compliance over the future. So there's two parts. One's a transition plan, and then one's an assessment, I believe. That might not be the right word, but essentially that's what it is.
Okay, the point is that with that many towns out there, I think we should step up and how we can possibly help or begin the process.
Absolutely. And we will be, you know, again, we're talking with IDOT about a pot of funds that we would be able to have for the region, building capacity from our staff to be able to do that as through our local technical assistance program teams. So yeah, we're going to start tackling this.
Thank you. Other questions? If not, under item 5, the election of officers, there was a committee formed. Do one of the members, Jim, do you want to give that report? Or Matt? Or Nina?
If not, I can summarize the memo that you have in your packet, agenda item number 5 here. So we convened the members that you nominated to discuss the executive committee nominations here. And so the nominating committee believed that most of the existing members that were there really represented the desired geographical balance while providing the mix of positions and experience across the region. So Chair, Mayor Bennett, Vice Chair, we've got Carolyn Schofield and Ann Sheehan. At large, we've got 3 members, Diane Williams, Paul Goodrich, and Mayor Noak. And so we've got 2 members from Cook County, 2 members from City of Chicago, and 2 members from Collier counties representing the geographic diversity of our region.
Thanks, Aaron. With that in mind, I'll entertain a motion that we accept the report of the executive committee nominations. Is there a motion?
So moved, Reinbold.
Second, Rodring.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Aaron, call the roll.
Mayor Bennett,
Aye.
Mayor Darch,
Aye.
Frank Beal, President Brawley,
Aye.
Paul Goodrich,
Aye.
Jim Healy, Nina Ida
Aye.
Mayor Noak,
Aye.
President Reinbold,
Aye.
Mayor Rotering,
Aye.
Stefan Schaefer,
Aye.
Carolyn Schofield,
Aye.
Ann Sheehan,
Aye.
Matt Walsh,
yes,
and Diane Williams.
Aye.
The motion. I congratulate the members and thank them for continuing on in their leadership role. And I want to thank the board for allowing me again to serve as chair of this organization. It's an honor and a privilege, and we will continue our work going forward, certainly under these difficult circumstances. Again, we are hoping to meet together someday soon, as the song goes. And especially next month, we have the combined meeting of our board and the MPO group. We'd love to try to do that in person, but we'll see as the days go by here, whether or not we'll have to continue it virtually. So again, thank you all. Under committee restructure, Amy, item 6.
And while Amy's unmuting, let me just share too that we had sent out a survey to our committee members to understand their availability and interest in returning to in-person work. So the memo that you've got summarizes in-person committee meetings. I'll share, and so we really were doing an analysis of, how does our committee structure best support our work and our board, but also understanding that we have some constraints right now with our ability to meet in person and meet the rules of the Open Meetings Act. So Amy, I'll take it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. So we kind of set 3 objectives. As Erin mentioned, first and foremost, we wanted to understand where our members were and what our opportunities were, but we also wanted to make sure, obviously, we can conduct the important business of the agency, that we can continue to be a regional convener on important issues where jurisdictions or partners need to share ideas with one another related to the implementation of the Onto 2050 plan. And then finally, we wanted to maintain transparency. So we took the opportunity to look at our committee structure, who makes decisions, who has financial authority, where those go, what are the pathways for approval for different actions here at CMAP. We're recommending the following actions, and then I'll talk about the background behind those. The first is to have the board approve a new set of what I'll call sanctioned committees. Those would be board-created committees that would meet the criteria of the Open Meetings Act and therefore would be conducted as an open meeting. Then we're going to be asking you to dissolve a series of committees because they don't meet the traditional definition in the Open Meetings Act. However, they're created by you, which is what requires them to be open. They don't make any decisions. They have no financial authority. They're traditionally just regional convenings to talk about subjects of interest across our multiple different stakeholder groups. Any second suggestions or recommendations that they create have to come through one of your other committees to get approved if there is any action being taken at all. So it would have to go to the board, the Transportation Committee, or the MPO Policy Committee as some examples. The third action, we want you to acknowledge for the public, truthfully, that your executive director has the opportunity and the authority to convene groups on a wide variety of subjects to support CMAP work, and that she regularly does this on your behalf to make sure that we have public input as we're developing different pieces of work, recommendations, and we need feedback from across the region. And then finally, we want to reiterate our commitment to transparency. The reason for taking these actions is to make sure we can continue to get that. If we take no action at all, with the information we have today, we're unable to meet with those committees because we are unable to pull a physical quorum in person should the governor choose to move forward with not extending a declaration of disaster in any individual month. So every month at this point, he has extended that, but we don't have necessarily a vision for how long that will continue. This will allow us to continue to get feedback on our work and to provide opportunities for people to talk to us about what we're proposing, while at the same time making sure that we are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. I'm going to go through just quickly, if there's no questions at this point, I'll go through our existing set of committee structures and then share also the committees that we will be going to, but I'll pause for questions here.
No questions?
All right. What you see in front of you is our existing committee structure. Some of these you'll see there's policy level, advisory level, and working level. The policy level groups are groups that we need to conduct our work, and they do meet the criteria in the Open Meetings Act and would continue to be open meetings. The groups at the advisory level, we'll talk a little bit about which one of those are changing when we get to the next slide. And then our working groups, those are the groups at the bottom that generally take no actions in general. It's not always the case, and we'll talk a little bit more about the exceptions as we move forward to the next slide. But there tend to be the groups that are helping us prepare our work as we're working through drafts, different ideas, best practices, examples from other areas. If you can move to the next slide. All right, what we're proposing going forward is that the CMAP board and the Metropolitan Planning Organization obviously would need to consider to be, continue to be meetings that are held and are open meetings. We have our Citizens Advisory Committee, which is required, and that would also continue to be a meeting that we meet regularly on and continues to be an open meeting, as well as the Council of Mayors. Then we would consolidate some of our committees to go into essentially a group that is dealing with our transportation work, our economic development work, and our climate work. So Aaron has talked to you about the strategic plan and the fact that for the next 3 to 5 years, CMAP will be focusing in the area of economic resilience, climate, and transportation. Much of the actual, what I'll say, functional work, the work where a vote is required, where a decision is being made, occurs in our area of transportation, where we're approving projects, we're approving funding, different strategies as it relates to that, and those would all continue to need to be conducted in that open meeting. So this kind of gives you a structure going forward. Now, we had to put this together in fairly short order, not being certain whether the governor was going to pass the next extension. Therefore, we do want to take the next couple of months to relook at and in more detail talk with the committee members. I think Erin mentioned at the beginning, she did meet with all the committee chairs, and we did reach out with our committee liaisons, and many of them also talked to their committee members to make sure that they understand that our goal, their input is appreciated, and we want to continue to receive that input, but a little bit of reorganization is going to be necessary if we're able to conduct certain meetings for input in this virtual setting. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
Amy, let me just make one quick note here, is that where it says coordinating committee to the left of the climate committee, that should actually say regional economic competitiveness committee.
Yes, it should. Thank you.
I think Leanne has a question.
Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, sure. I actually have quite a sort of few questions / comments. I guess overall, I would be concerned about the board voting on this specifically today. That some of these decisions and some of these committees, one of the beauties of CMAP really is the breadth and depth of the groups that meet, the input that they get, the vetting of issues that they have. And I do think in this immediate term, and Amy touched on this, it seems like it was kind of fairly quickly put together, that I don't know, I think we need to separate the conversation out from sort of the COVID and the governor's executive order discussions and those requirements of open meeting, like from a full restructuring of committee CMAP, the CMAP committees and other groups. You know, I mean, the beauty of CMAP is this marrying of sort of the land use and the transportation and this the richness of conversation and input that we get in developing all these things. I also don't think that it's just a CMAP board decision to actually make this. We have the MPO, which is actually in federal rules, kind of the entity that actually is responsible fundamentally for ultimately approving the comprehensive plan. And then all the transportation funding, which is a lot of the other stuff that sort of funnels and filters through this. So whereas if the board votes, that's one thing, but I also feel like this is something that the MPO needs to have a conversation and discussion around. And so I think that this just needs more time. I would also suggest that under the heading sort of transparency and openness, that we maybe put this out for some public comment and input before the board is actually looking to make a decision. I've got some other thoughts and other questions, but I'll let other board members jump in, and I'll step back for now.
Chairman, with your permission, I'm happy to answer a few of the questions that Member Redden brought up.
Sure.
Before that, I just want to comment that I do generally agree with Mayor Noak with those comments as well.
Well,
Got it.
we're fortunate. I think we do too, and that's why this is an interim measure. As I mentioned, we always come back to you in January and bring you a slate of committees. But for right now, there are certain committees we essentially cannot convene at all because we won't be able to pull a quorum. And we certainly don't want to be in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So what we're proposing today is that those committees that do not make decisions, any of their actions have to come to another body for them to move forward in any way, would be the groups that if we still needed to convene for a business reason, that could be a choice of the executive director. All of the transportation committees that report to the MPO are the same as they were previously and have not been modified. And so those decision-making groups are certainly meet the criteria of the Open Meetings Act, and those aren't suggested to be modified. But again, our goal here is to take some initial action right now before January to be able to continue to talk with folks and be open and have those conversations with regional partners, recognizing that we need to come back in January and potentially when COVID is a little different than it is today, hopefully, with plans and additional feedback and input and certainly a firmed plan for moving forward.
If I could just jump in with one additional comment just to sort of clarify, I executive director of another public entity, and we have a very different, and we've spoken to many people, including the Attorney General and others, about the governor's executive order and the requirements around Open Meetings Act. I get it that we're in a month-to-month situation, but there has been some flexibility, and they have opined on some of that flexibility for sort of a period to transition back and things like that. So I guess that's my other point about, I feel like we're being rushed to make a decision. The board is being rushed, I don't vote on this one, but rushed to make a decision on something that could be still, I think, vetted, reviewed, and maybe reacted to on a month-by-month basis without making sort of, and as Amy said, dissolving of committees that have been to some extent on the books and well tested and useful for the past sort of 15 plus years.
And if I could just jump in here, Leanne, I think one of the challenges that we're facing here is the discussions that happen at the working group are informal. There's no financial decision-making happening there. There's no authority and there's no action taken. And so our goal is not to not have those conversations. Our goal is to really strategically align with what is considered a formal Open Meetings Act meeting and what is, just essentially a regional convening of stakeholders around our work and our policy priorities here. And so this allows us to be more flexible in terms of the work, to convene people at any point in time, continue to convene people on Zoom, have phone calls, and not be in violation of the Open Meetings Act and be more flexible. So in January, our goal is to come back with a fully fleshed out plan of who belongs on what committee. And we've been taking into consideration who's on what committees right now and how sort of the land use and housing work that we have does fall in this regional economy space. It's so important for us to understand. So that is our plan, that we map this out over the next couple of months, but this will help us be flexible and meet the Open Meetings Act requirements in the coming months, given sort of the uncertainties that we've been dealing with. Diane, did you have, I saw.
I was just trying to clarify, because to some extent, it sounds like we're asking for an interim structure until, in fact, January, when at which time we would actually then vote on a structure for going forward. So that would give us time between now and then to do some of the vetting and sharing that Leanne has mentioned in her discussion. So am I right in thinking about it that way?
Yeah, so we're taking action on the step of dissolving some of the committees, but recognizing that every year in January, the board reapproves the committees. We will spend the next couple of months going through and sorting all of that out, committee membership, rules and of order, all of that sort of stuff. So the final action, should you consider that, would be taken in January.
Aaron, if I can, I mean, we've talked about this, discussed it, and the problem we have with some of these committees is that they're static. I mean, they haven't really been able to meet, so nothing's really changed or gone on that much, especially over the last year and a half because of COVID. And as Aaron indicated, I think this is a a setting of the table, so to speak, going forward about how we can function, certainly under the new rules going forward, but more importantly for staff to put together what can be a meaningful committee situation. CMAP is, from day one, as you've mentioned, Leanna, is a great organization, and we have been very transparent, and we are literally all over the playing field and tried to set that up initially with all these different committees. But as time has gone on, if these committees aren't really functioning, if they're not really being, is recently not even meeting, what's the purpose of having these committees? Because it's on paper doesn't necessarily mean it's been functional. And I think that's what Aaron and staff are trying to do, is put together a program that makes these things meaningful. And certainly that the topics we try to cover, a catch-all of all different facets of life within the metropolitan area with all these different committees. Some, the important ones are not being changed at all, which is certainly transportation, but some of the smaller ones or ones that have not really met, the purpose again is to try to make it of substance going forward. And I think that's what's being recommended here. And again, in January would be a final structured committee. And certainly between now and then, I'm sure these committees and or members and or the community at large would be asked to engage in a discussion regarding it. But for the most part, I think a lot of that is probably through more organizations, nonprofits or other organizations that associate with us as part of what they are doing in a crossover with us on those various committees. And it would give our staff an opportunity to have a discussion as going forward as to the significance of possibly even maintaining some of these committees. But again, it's an opportunity for staff to do this.
Nina has her hand raised.
Good morning, everyone. So I just have 3 clarifying questions that I'm hoping you'll be able to help me with. So between now and January, if we were to vote for this new structure, can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in leading up? Like what's the interaction with us? What's the interaction with the public to formalize what those committees may look like in January?
Yeah, so right now, and Amy, you can build on what I'm saying, is that we have been in discussions with the committee chairs and co-chairs that we have, and talking about sort of where there are opportunities for those organizations to continue to participate in our work. And I think, we're doing strategic planning at the same time, and we've identified 3 core focus areas of our work, which are regional economic competitiveness, climate, and transportation, which is where those sort of 3 core committees that you saw at the bottom of that chart ended up. And so in some instances, I know that on our land use and housing committee, we have a number of experts that are interested in talking to and being a part of the regional economic competitiveness, because where housing and land use decisions are made is an important element of that discussion. And so I think the same for the Human and Community Development Committee, right? Can we bring some more of those voices to the transportation room so that they aren't sort of sitting in a committee structure by themselves? So that's the discussions that are going to be happening with the committee members in the following months.
Okay, thank you. And then if you needed to convene, because I know you mentioned that you could have the authority to convene kind of like these ad hoc meetings. So if there was something that came up that was super specific, you would be able to convene some committee members to talk about that topic.
Absolutely. I mean, we do this on a project basis. Every regional project that we have, every sub-regional project that we have has an advisory committee of its own in addition to our committees. And so, again, this will help streamline the stakeholders, allow us to bring in other partners and not be in violation of Open Meetings Act requirements for some of these structures.
Okay. And then my last question is just, if we don't vote on this, could you just I know we talked about being in violation of the Open Meetings Act. That's what's at stake, right? And what happens if we're in violation of the Open Meetings Act?
If we're, we wouldn't be able to conduct meetings, essentially, is what happens. So one of the
we
things—
wouldn't be able to get business done.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my questions.
Aaron, so they haven't been able to meet for the last year at all?
We have had, when there was that long-standing governor's declaration that was a year, or I'm not sure how long it was for, 6 months, we were able to conduct meetings virtually like we were now. One of the challenges is that in the spirit of transparency, we always post our agendas a week in advance. And we didn't receive the last notice for the governor's disaster declaration until after we had posted some meeting minutes. So we're constantly in this sort of like jerking of back and forth saying, we're going to meet in person. And then people are like, well, we're not going to meet in person. And then it's like, okay, well, now we can meet virtually. So I think we want to sort of sort that out, be intentional about sort of our operationalizing of the committees and when they meet and all of those sorts of things. Amy, was there something else that I'm overlooking?
No, I think the big thing is being able to communicate with our committee members. We would basically have to say, you need to be here in person, and then we would wait for the governor's new declaration, because now we're on a 30-day by 30-day basis. And so it's really working with our committee members, being able to inform our work. We will have less interaction with these committees because they have told us they don't want to come in person if that happens. And so we're really trying to avoid less interaction or less feedback and input in this interim time period. And as Aaron mentioned, leading into January, we can talk with many more of our committee members, understand where they're at, understand what they're interested in, and then come back to you with those details and a recommendation for going forward.
And real quick, I'm sorry, Nancy and Karen have their hands up, and I did not raise my hand formally. I just started talking. It seems like, I mean, some of the discussion relates around the fact that it's hard and it is unknowable at this point. Hardly a reason, in my opinion, to dissolve committees. I really do value the opinions of the qualified professionals that serve on these committees. And if we're getting ready to make changes in January, then maybe the status quo is sufficient for now. I'm not, unless there's something I'm missing here, it seems like we're dissolving the committees for potentially adding some back later, or more of an ad hoc role to get their feedback. And what message is that sending to our counties, our land use folks, our housing, and that kind of thing, when we are an organization that, you know, fosters collaboration? It seems like a move in the opposite direction.
Really is the formalization of having a committee that has an agenda, that has formal minutes and all of those things, and the fact that we continue to do this based on our projects all the time. So, you know, we convene the county board chairs. It's an informal meeting of them. We will continue to do that. That was not sort of on our, we have lots of these sort of dangling committees, that ad hoc convenings. And so I think one of the things is we're trying to shore all of those things up and make sure that they work together seamlessly here over the next couple months. Mayor Darch.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, it just seems to me, because it's not like a bylaws change, but it's a fairly big decision to dissolve something, even though that may ultimately be, from everything that's said, where a lot of this goes. And we totally get it in local government with committees and Open Meetings Act, and where some of it becomes a little heavy. But my thought would be to sort of Leanne's initial point, the MPO and CMAP have a joint meeting in October. What about at least taking 30 days, putting this over to that October agenda for another look at it, maybe for some public comment that would come in then. And even at that point, you know, to the last set of comments, maybe no action until the January action is okay. But I would say at a minimum, just taking the 30 days, you know, tabling this item till that joint meeting might be one way to give us a little more time to consider it.
Thanks. Nancy?
Thanks, and great points, Karen. I support what you're saying. Recognizing you're trying to achieve efficiencies, and I appreciate the limited resources that we have. The mission and the work aren't being subsumed. It's just a rejiggering of how you'll be approaching the problem solving. And I want to make sure that we recognize that. All of us recognize this challenge and these problems. And so I understand completely where you're coming from. I had two questions, actually a question and a statement. One, has anyone been in touch with the governor's office? There's a group of mayors who are regularly working with the governor's office. I think it's important for them to know that the challenges they may be having with timely notice are having this rippling effect, because I suspect they don't recognize that. So that's one thing. And then the other point that I have been made aware of is that members of the Illinois General Assembly are looking at sort of expanding the use of electronic meetings so that it doesn't have to be a pandemic for people to participate in this manner in a much broader way. So just wanted to share those 2 points. But I agree. I think maybe a little bit of time for more input, but I recognize the challenges that you're working through and want to just highlight. I know that this group of professionals is not diminishing those voices whatsoever. You're just doing it in a way that's going to meet the requirements of the process. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and I know we've been closely in touch with Dave Bennett at the Mayor's Caucus to sort of understand what discussions are being had. You know, we'd love to have some solid answers on what we can hold in the future openly and you know, what tools will be allowable. At the end of the day, it's a good thing, right? If we can get some of this virtual technology, especially for a regional organization. Mayor
Aaron,
Bennett?
it appears that the, you know, the board is not sure of deciding or making a vote this morning on your recommendation. And I guess I would suggest, not that it would necessarily stop with what you're trying to do, is to continue this study or this information gathering, if you want to call it that, of what is being done out there and what isn't, and what needs to be combined or what doesn't, at least again for another 30 days to give the board an opportunity to have this information sink in and to ask questions and to find out possibly specifically how they feel some impact will take place in a negative way. Understand one other thing. The MPO, yes, they are part of the organization, but again, we're not going to get back to the tail and the head wagging. The board of directors of CMAP has always been the lead, and usually the MPO will take that recommendation from the board. It's not a competing thing. It has been historically and traditionally one where the MPO, in fact, usually follows the lead of the CMAP board as to decision making. Nothing's being changed or suggested to be changed on transportation, which is the main focus of the MPO and their transportation committees. So to assure those, that's not being recommended at all. So I would agree then with the board. I'm getting a feel that the majority would prefer not to vote on this today, and we can take it for another 30 days and maybe come back with some other recommendations and or to set the table, so to speak, for a formal vote if needed in January as to the restructuring of the committees. Is that fair enough to the board members?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
I will not call a motion for this recommendation. We'll hold off again until October and see what staff will come back to us with as far as the recommendation. Again, understand one other thing, because I had a long conversation with Aaron. There are a lot of things going on out there. And the question is, and I've talked to other mayors, are we out there all over the place and not, you know, we're trying to cover everything, but nothing is being done or nothing is really coming to a conclusion or a formality with this board on all those structured committees. And I don't want this organization, I would sure you don't either, to become one of just a lot of information and no action. I think I've heard that over the years. You know, what can the CMAP board do to make an impact, significant impact? And we have in certain areas, but understand there are a ton of things going on out there, and whether or not, you know, all of it can be, all that activity can be done through all these various committees. So I understand what the staff is recommending, and certainly for you know, for us, majority of the board or good portion of the board of mayors, how can CMAP help us locally in government and the interest level, or certainly the priority level, who's calling the shots as to what our priorities are not. And again, this board's going to have to, I guess, in January, you know, come to some agreement as to where the priorities stick. And that doesn't necessarily mean elimination of a topic, but a combination of groups of things together that maybe, you know, more action can be taken with these groups coming together and sharing that information. Aaron?
Great. Thank you. Well, then moving on to item number 7, I think this is where we had wanted to spend more time discussing with you some of the impacts that you've seen across the region related to the economy. I've spoken with many of you individually about your concerns about how COVID has impacted our transportation and our economic systems. And so we've been pursuing numerous efforts, not just to react to these near-term impacts, but really take intentional actions to assess and address the long-term impacts and really thinking about how that impacts our ability to achieve our 2050 goals that we've set forward here. So want to get your feedback on this here, and we've left some time for discussion. So I have one slide with a couple of the initiatives that we've done related to mobility. And then I wanted to open it up for discussion here. So in terms of mobility recovery, we initiated some work last year to help the region understand and overcome the transportation challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our goal is really to develop some solutions that think about how this current challenge can help us seize these long-term opportunities, these structural issues that exist in our transportation funding with an eye towards equity and climate resilience here. So we've been looking at and exploring a range of policy, financial, and programming strategies to mitigate the impacts and embrace opportunities such as, what are the travel demand management policies that we need to put in place to help us reduce the already returning levels of congestion. Congestion pricing is an effective tool that could be implemented here in the region to help mitigate some of those impacts. But thinking too about how we integrate different transportation systems that are emerging, this concept of micro-mobility, and how do we think about really, stop talking about that last mile problem that we have and solving some of those challenges together. I think we've also done some work around how do we prioritize equity when we're allocating transportation funding and investments. We've seen some positive signs that USDOT is interested in this as well. But we've been doing this on our own through our STP Shared Fund. How can we help make sure that helps, that they're finding tools, funding, resources available to help support communities that don't have the resources to match these funds. And I think the state DOT has also taken some proactive steps there to be able to allow communities to have different matching tools and mechanisms to advance projects that are really important. And then I know cities across the region have been talking about how to make permanent some of these successful COVID-19 pilot projects, reallocating the public right-of-way, thinking about shared streets, quick-filled bus lanes, really connect our bicycle and pedestrian networks in more meaningful ways to get people not just for recreational activities, but out there to get to places of employment. So to that end, I think my next slide here is really a few questions that I wanted to get some feedback from our board here on. I would love to hear about how your community would be affected if more regional residents work from home more of the time, or if riders don't return to public transit at pre-COVID levels. And I think too, another concern that we have as a regional agency that we're trying to wrap our policy brains and data brains around here is if more of the region's residents travel by car for both work and non-work trips, what do we need to be investing in differently here across the region? Or how do we mitigate that if that's not the future that we see? I'll pause there and open it up.
Questions, comments?
Jerry, Karen Darch, just a couple of comments. One of my favorite topics. I'm glad this is on, but clearly we just spoke about this as well at a board meeting last night. If more residents work from home more of the time in towns like Barrington or most of us on the Northwest commuter line, it's for the city itself, for the village itself, a big impact because we own so much parking. And which has, been hugely important over the years. But does that change how we ultimately use that land because of needing less parking for commuters? It changes one reason why a lot of people move to our communities because they are close to a train line. So I think we'll see. I think these are pretty far out, but it's possible that it changes, a lot of that land use in town and why you move to the community. I think from the Chicago perspective, if one of my trustees was saying last night that her law firm isn't going back till January. And she said, I think a lot of people will continue to work from home, and maybe we're seeing long-term changes. I think the implications of Chicago being impacted as that central city that we rely on so much, that we go to and visit, because of what that lack of office and daytime traffic, daytime downtown traffic will have, will affect all of our communities. So, we're a walkable community, so people staying at home, there'll be more cars on the road, but there are a lot of bikes and people walking around who would be working from home. And personally, I don't know if we overstep what we normally do when we talk about safety, but I think in addition to the pandemic and its effect on transportation and transit, that last mile of hopping off the train at Ogilvy and walking in the loop to go to the things that we just took for granted before, and just going downtown to enjoy Chicago for things. I think the whole safety piece can't be discounted, that people are thinking twice about what that means right now. That to me goes part and parcel. Does that mean people travel by car more often to go to the city rather than taking the train because they won't really have to be walking on the street? I don't know, but anyway, just some random thoughts from me.
Yeah, the only comment I would make is, Karen, as you pointed out, you basically pointed out 3 safety issues. 1, transportation. 2, the workplace. And obviously 3, getting to the workplace ultra area around it. That, again, we're still in such a flux because the pandemic continues to drive the safety aspect on all 3 of those, well, 2 of those anyway. And again, I don't know if anybody has an answer or the reaction should be short-term, long-term, until we reach some phase beyond the question of safety. And again, if people feel safe, they will, starting at the workplace, they'll do that. Then the choice becomes whether it's public transportation or their car. And that question, again, because we've been such up and down with the threat levels, even since January, that's kind of a hard thing to judge. But I think if the point is going forward, do we really still look at it as a short-term problem, or whether or not, in fact, it develops into a long-term strategy where people won't be returning to their jobs and working out of the house? Very difficult, certainly for me to try to answer that or project that. I mean, as you recall, last year we were trying to even think short-term. Once a vaccine came out, whether or not it would be an impact, and there was a slight one, or more than a slight one. The statistics will show who's using public transportation or the increase in public transportation. So we continue to monitor that. It's a tough question, and I agree. I think everybody's still waiting to get beyond the health and safety threat that just exists with the existence of the COVID levels that are out there right now. So tough question.
Right. Just to be clear, Jerry, in safety, I'm talking about crime as much as COVID. The feeling of safely walking in Chicago has changed, I think, for some of us, given some of the reports and what's happening. And to the extent that we have any influence on that as CMAP or a consideration, that's what I'm saying. I see that as a threat beyond the pandemic, but it's arisen at the same time. And what happens there, I think, impacts a lot of the other stuff. So
no, I agree. I'd say the part 3 of that was the safety of the streets, and from an organization, as far as that is concerned, I mean, obviously we're limited with the the public safety of the public safety organizations. Whether or not the question then becomes, as the question is out there, how else do you attack the problem of crime or of that type of problem with the city of Chicago? Again, whether it's issues of housing, whether it's issues of economic development, et cetera. That's always been ongoing. But in the streets itself, this organization is going to be somewhat limited to addressing that issue with the city itself. So, no, I understand part three of what you said. That's what I indicated was the safety of the streets.
And if I could just add, we certainly understand being in the city that is a concern. It really is a result in some ways of the pandemic as well. We have seen a rise in carjacking of kids under 16 even, and it's because they didn't have any place to go. So I think that this kind of is a confluence of a lot of different things. That one of the things that has bubbled up is this public safety question. Aaron, it may make sense for, in our next meeting, I could give a little bit of a presentation on our plans, both kind of near term, but also medium and long term. And it's something that we are addressing, and it's something that we're fortunate in that there are a lot of resources that are being provided to the city to support both, as you said, that there was, housing issues, that there are economic development issues. All of these things come together. And one of the things that our mayor has said is, that this has to be a whole of government approach. So maybe that's something that we can add in, a very quick kind of readout of our plans, both short, medium, and long term, because it is something that is very concerning, but I think it's also something that we are dealing with very forwardly. And I apologize for not raising my hand as well. I see there are a bunch of hands up.
It's okay. Well, that's a good idea. Bring that back to this group. I think Member Healy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to know, have we started to look at utilization of office space, whether there's more vacancies? I think we're starting to see a little bit of that out in DuPage. Because of Amazon and everything else, we were already experiencing a reduction in space being rented for commercial space for sales and things of that nature. We have remarkably seen an increase in sales taxes. And I think that one of the things we might want to look at is, are people staying more in their counties and their cities and spending the money there as opposed to going to downtown Chicago or to other places where they worked? And also, I think the real estate space is going to be a big indicator of what's happening, at least in the near future, for the next 6 months to a year, because we've already had the year and a half of COVID. The indicators are starting to be there now, and I think that we should start taking a look at all those things.
Thanks for that. Mayor Rotering?
Just a couple of things specific to our community. I know our local economy is doing better as more people are eating here during the day than downtown. I'm also recognizing missing areas of sidewalk. A lot of people are walking a lot, and it's becoming more clear that connectivity is going to be more of a priority than it was. Concerns will be around the potential for a diminished metro schedule. I know over the summer it was abbreviated, then it got boosted. I'm concerned that if ridership stays down, we'll go back to abbreviated, which will limit access to folks who need to get to their jobs regardless of cars. Our own fund balance for our parking lots is diminishing obviously significantly as nobody's parking there. Back to that schedule, back to whole lots of different stations not even being used because the train never stopped there. And then of course, traffic in the region seems to be drastically upticking. So that's just our community.
Thanks, Mayor. Pam?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that about the metro schedule as well. I know, I'm hearing a lot from colleagues across the city that use Metro, and a lot of folks aren't coming down here because the Metro schedule is not convenient for them any longer, but they also feel like it's too far for them to drive. And so people are feeling like, it's sort of a chicken and the egg issue where people would rather work from home because it's too far to drive, and there's, it would take several hours. Either they have to stay really late or come really early, and it's just not conducive to work. So that's just a concern that I think about as well.
Thanks. Marinoke?
Yeah, we talked a lot about the last mile, but I really want everybody to continue to think about, when things go to a final distribution point for delivery, as home delivery continues to grow, especially with the pandemic continuing. It's not just the last mile. We also have to look at the impact on, I'm going to preface this as the last 20 miles, which hits our region obviously a little more disproportionate than most. And that those final mile facilities, those materials have to come from somewhere, and they come somewhere in between. And a lot of times they come from our region or other regions adjacent to ours. So we need to continue to look at the pace at which those get replenished has increased as well. So we need to continue to look at that almost on kind of two different levels in that final stretch. Because the final stretch isn't just a final mile, it's there's an intermediate part of that. So something to think about.
Yeah, good points there. Stefan?
Yeah, this has been a really nice discussion. I would offer some thoughts from a Chicago perspective, as well as just, being able to utilize data to understand kind of the underlying mode shift here. So not only thinking about, the shift from transit to cars, but just, is there a shift to other modes as well? I know Member Rotering mentioned increase in walking. I know biking has increased in Chicago as well. And just thinking about not only the underlying shift to car, but to these other modes as well. One thing I'd want to elevate as well is just thinking about pollution, air quality considerations, right? And just thinking about if it is a greater shift to vehicles or proportion of vehicles, like what does that mean in terms of air quality within a certain community? If the overall number of trips is decreasing, right? If you're measuring vehicle miles traveled and you're seeing less activity, perhaps this is actually a net benefit, right? There are a lot of more local, low carbon trips, walking and biking. So, thinking about, for a city, can government or can communities help develop plans that plan for that kind of lower carbon future, where maybe there aren't as many longer trips being taken, but instead you're thinking about making investments in systems that are lower carbon and more localized, whether that's bike share networks or sidewalks or that infrastructure. So I think this is an opportunity to reconsider codes more broadly and thinking about development, not necessarily thinking about roadways and the long trips that may not be here to stay long term. And, basically promoting the values we're hoping to achieve in terms of having those lower carbon modes, lower polluting options, and re-envisioning those public spaces. I think about Chicago with a lot of the shift of parking lots, for instance, right, or entire streets to open eateries during the pandemic. Is that something that we push forward in terms of a more permanent solution? So yeah, those are just some thoughts out loud. Oh, and the last thing I'll say is also maybe necessitating just intentional thought about how do you create interdependencies between modes, right? In Chicago, they have a rideshare fee that helps support CTA, right? And you also have the bike share network as part of the transit system here. It's considered a public good. So some of the revenues being raised in one sector, does that help support other sectors kind of during these peaks and valleys? Just something to consider as well.
Thanks, Stefan. Nina?
Yeah, so I did put the link to Chicago's Central City Recovery Plan in case anyone's interested. These are questions that we definitely have been talking about. And for me personally, as a planning professional, even outside of my job with the city of Chicago, I think this is a time that has really made us confront a lot of the issues that have been happening, but you just haven't seen them. Like we talk about crime. Crime has been happening in certain communities for a very long time, but it's spilling over now. People are starting to notice these kind of inequities being heightened because of the pandemic, right? And so now us as professionals are forced to confront these things and say, oh, we actually have to work on them and think outside of the box. Like it can't just, it can't just be my section and your section. And is tied together in so many different ways. And I think for me, it's really exciting for somebody who has been doing equity work my entire career for that to now be at the forefront and actually have to confront these issues and have these really hard conversations. I also think it's really important for us to get creative about how we're seeing development. The city of Chicago just passed our first ETOD policy plan, which is really exciting. So it's about, yes, thinking about transit and getting from point A to point B, but also what if somebody wants to stay in point A for a few hours? Like what amenities are we offering there? Or if you didn't want to come all the way to the Loop, but you wanted to go down 2 stations on the Orange Line, what's something that you could do there? So also thinking in kind of like those short-term trips where, and just as it was mentioned, with Divvy being expanded, like what are those short trips looking like? How can we entice people to be out and to spend money and to have fun and see their neighbors without it being kind of onerous and them feeling like they have to get into their car? So I think this is a really important opportunity. It's an atmosphere of opportunity for us all to push ourselves and even developers to think outside the box and not stick with what has been done, because we've seen that has not necessarily worked when it comes to equity. And I think that this is an opportunity for the entire region to kind of get on the same page as far as like, what does equity actually look like in the built environment? Not just talking about it, but what can we actually do about it? And how are these public programs, whether it be after school programming, having summer camps like FLIP, how does that affect what the ripple effect of how we see the built environment and how?
Thanks, Nina. Leanne?
Yeah, just perhaps a little echoing some of the stuff that Nina said. I think that the CMAP has a really good guiding plan already with onto 2050. And I think stepping back and sort of focusing on those big policy and those big regional conversations, those tough conversations. Nina was sort of saying some of these things that we've kind of known have been out there, but now we're actually very much forced to contemplate and maybe speed up how we want to address some of those. Thinking about sort of, and I think this is really where CMAP's sort of strength really is sort of this nexus or this intersection between sort of the transportation issues, the land use, and some of the broader sort of economic and social issues that we as a region have to contemplate. And it's not one of the challenges too, I think, is it's not just one size fits all. Sort of ideas, issues, and solutions within the city of Chicago will be somewhat different and unique to that, and will need to be modified and sort of thought about differently, say in Lake County. And I think that's where CMAP's real value is. I think we've got a lot of that good guidance already established, sort of at least a starting point for some of those key topics within Onto 2050, and thinking about how we can put our efforts into executing and building off that plan, implementing that plan. The only other final point that I'll just raise is we have kicked off in the transit specific slice of this, a final step in our recovery work, and that's the redoing of the strategic plan with about a 5-year outlook on that, recognizing that there's a lot of uncertainty. But we look to take guidance from sort of what the Onto 2050 plan has as a foundation point from which to build as we're contemplating sort of all these changes, the virus, what employers are choosing to do or not do, and all of that in our thinking. So there'll be a lot more engagement and opportunities as part of that. But I do think sort of taking the opportunity to look back at Onto 2050 and building from that guidance that we already have would be, I think, a good way to sort of advance the conversations forward.
Thank you. Well, let's put the slides back up. I'm going to run through what we've been doing in the economic space, but I'll hold on the discussion questions because I know I'd love for you to hear about the FLIP program, and the state has taken some actions, and some bills have passed. So I want to make sure that we have time for that too.
Aaron, one other quick thing before we switch on to that topics to think about as the landscapes change. One thing we don't talk about often, but does have an overall effect on transportation and many other factors, is changing leisure travel. I noticed a large shift in people moving away from traveling outside of our region and staying in the greater region, within the greater region outside, Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, and that effect on travel and in the way that people are utilizing their own personal cars. Just it's something we don't talk a lot about, but something definitely there's been a trend in shift in that.
No, certainly appreciate that. And I actually think that's a great segue into just a 2-minute overview of what we've been doing in the economic recovery space here, right? Is that, when the stay-at-home order began, we kicked off the Regional Economic Recovery Task Force, which has allowed us to look at some of these programmatic initiatives, convene different stakeholders in meaningful ways to instigate some new collaboratives. And so we convened the region's tourism organizations and successfully launched a joint tourism campaign. It was called The Only Thing Missing Is You, and the focus really was on sort of that hyper local, like within driving distance, is there a place that I can get to and still feel safe? We've really been uniting the region's partners around the benefits of a regional 211 service and provided some best practice information on that. 211 systems go beyond just sort of, I need help in this moment, and we can connect job seekers to job service organizations, in addition to sort of thinking about sort of, are they just sort of health connections or social service connections? They can really be more meaningful than that. We've convened all of the region's economic development organizations on an ongoing basis, including Intersect Illinois and World Business Chicago, to move a regional agenda forward. And as of the end of this week, we'll be moving forward with a partnership to launch a set of convenings to bring the civic, philanthropic, and government stakeholders together around a framework for an inclusive economic growth platform for our region. So we're really excited about all of this work. There's still a ton to be done, but I will ask that if you do have thoughts on sort of the questions that I was going to ask here, is just, we want to hear from our board members about what you think the most pressing economic challenges are today. Some of them were referenced as we were talking about transportation, but there will be things that will be amplified and different, due to COVID and how slow or quickly we are able to recover from this. So again, I'm going to pause this conversation because I want to get to the rest of our agenda here. So unless there are any final thoughts on sort of those activities, I'm happy to keep us moving there, Bennett.
Questions, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and move on to Flip, and then I'll reach out to some of you individually to get some perspectives here on that.
All right, great. Under item 8, the Flip program.
Yes, we will turn it over to Michelle and Courtney.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Agunloye. I'm an engagement associate at CMAP, and I'm also one of the co-directors for the Future Leaders in Planning program. So myself and Courtney will be providing you all with a summary of this year's program and sharing a few key takeaways from this year's experience. Next slide, please. So I'll start off by providing you all with a background on the Future Leaders in Planning program and some key objectives. So we're currently in our 13th year of existence. The program was developed in 2008 with the goal of inspiring future leaders in the planning profession. This program actually was modeled off of the Atlanta Regional Commission's Model ARC program. And so at the time, CMAP did not have a youth engagement program. And so we were turning to partners to see what they've been doing to engage youth in this planning profession. And so since then, we've continued to grow the pipeline of urban planners by fostering meaningful civic engagement, generating an awareness of the planning profession, and introducing high school students to foundations in urban planning. And I'll be remiss to not mention that our very own executive director, Erin Alleman, was a part of the process in developing the FLIP program. So thank you for the work you've done in making FLIP what it is today. So as I mentioned, we've been around for 13 years. Our mission hasn't changed. We've been able to interact with hundreds of students from across our 7-county region and played a pivotal role in introducing students to the planning profession and similar fields. I do also want to mention that our program has typically focused on a theme. We've invited students into our offices to learn about topics such as transportation, water resource management, and climate change. Since then, we've changed, and I'll get into details about what that change has looked like, but we've still been aimed at providing students with the foundation in planning. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, we went through a flip redesign. We partnered with Muse Consulting to redesign the flip curriculum. So for this year's program, we rebranded to a Flip Friday series in which we held virtual sessions Fridays for 90 minutes via Zoom during the month of July. When we decide to offer in-person programming for next year, we'll likely continue with this format, but hopefully having a full day Friday series as opposed to the 90 minutes virtually. Despite this, we are still providing students with an introduction to urban planning principles, but we're no longer focused on a theme. Rather, we're thinking about planning from a macro to micro level. So the first half of the program will focus on larger concepts in urban planning, topics focused on inequities in urban planning and how research informs planning decisions. And then that second half gets into the more micro level of planning, where we're offering students an opportunity to get hands-on experience in urban planning, and also providing students with some background knowledge on the typical dilemmas planners face on a daily basis. This year, we were intentional about incorporating equity. We were intentional about this given the fact that students are getting a foundation in urban planning, but it's important to also highlight the inequities in the planning profession. This year, we were able to offer students with more opportunities to lead group activities, and I'll get into an example of that in the next slide. And then we closed out with an implementation plan that allows students to share an idea of what they like implemented in their communities. And I'll get into that in the next slide as well. Next slide, please. Great. So just to share some brief highlights from this year's program. As I mentioned, incorporating equity within this year's program was crucial. At the end of the flip sessions, we actually had a survey that we provided to students. And one of the themes that came out of it was how much they learned from learning about the inequities in the urban planning profession, and particularly having Tanika Johnson from the Folded Map Project to discuss how housing segregation impacts Chicago, how it impacts underrepresented communities and communities that are oftentimes marginalized. And so incorporating that equity piece actually inspired students to want to make change in their communities and to be better advocates. So we'll continue to incorporate equity in future leaders in planning program. In addition to this, we had engaging lectures, both virtually in person and in person. Thank you in advance to our session leaders that helped make this a dynamic and engaging program. In addition to this, we had 2 group activities, and you can see here there are 2 screenshots of 2 of those activities. One was a prioritized investment activity where students were provided with $1 billion to fund a few projects in their community. And this was an opportunity for students to speak up and to voice concerns about projects they felt that should be put on hold or postponed, and to also highlight projects they felt needed to be prioritized. And then we closed out with that implementation plan. And so this is a screenshot of what we provided students with on our mural board. So students were asked to actually write down a plan they had for their community, and they presented that to the larger group. We also included a flip engagement page. This is what we used last year, and we found it to be incredibly effective. This flip engagement page was an opportunity for students to have access to pre-session content, to engage in discussion board with other students, and to also complete homework assignments. This year's engagement page actually had an 80% participation rate each week, and that was a 30% increase from last year's programming. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Courtney to talk about the virtual sessions.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. So as Michelle just explained, we had virtual sessions that were about 90 minutes long. This was very different from what we did in previous years. So as Michelle mentioned, we no longer were doing things around the program. So those things could have been transportation or water resource management or climate change. So last year we had some pretty cool sessions. We did like planning around urban streets festivals. We also had Tanika Johnson come to speak to students, and that was actually students' favorite session. So we invited her back, and this year's curriculum development was with assistance from Muse Community Design. So this session mostly focused on planning from a micro to micro level, as Michelle mentioned. So the first session was centering equity and planning. So we had Tanika Johnson come give an overview of the Folded Map project and also speak with students. Then the planning and practice session, we talked about different planning related fields, skills that planners will need to have. And we had Dr. Kate Lowe from UIC CUPPA come and give a presentation about the importance of engaging residents in planning projects. We also had our very own Lindsay Bailey, who's a senior planner at CMAP, talk about using data to inform decisions. And she also gave an overview of one of the LTA projects, the Elevated Chicago Green Line South project. And then we concluded with Nina. Thank you so much, Nina, for being our speaker for our final week, where Nina introduced students to equitable transit-oriented development. And then they also learned about implementing a plan. And you can go to the next slide. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, we had our Flip engagement page, and the engagement page really came out of, we have a contract with Bang the Table, and it's an online engagement platform, and we actually house a lot of our LTA projects on the website. And this allows us to get any type of public feedback from surveys, polls, or discussion forums. And so we thought, you know, since we had to go virtual because of the pandemic, why not allow students to engage with each other online on discussion forums with homework assignments, or just give them a space to get to know each other. So we have, you know, weekly homework assignments that they will complete. So like for Tanika Johnson's week, they did a map twin project where they had to find a twin on the map of the address that they lived at, and then, you know, look on Google Maps and look at some of the differences in streets or sidewalks, different establishment buildings that they saw. As I mentioned just now, they also had opportunities to get to know each other. So we also did a, you know, meet your peers, introduce yourselves to each other. And I think students really enjoyed this because those quick 90-minute sessions just didn't allow them the opportunity to get to know each other like it would have if we were in person. We also provided just, you know, various resources like, you know, videos, resources to other related material on the subject for that week. And as Michelle said, we did have an 80% engagement rate with the page with students, which was a huge increase from the previous year when we first introduced the engagement page. And you can go to the next slide. And one of the good things that we got to do this year, we did get to do a field trip, a socially distant, safe field trip. So the third session where Lindsay Bailey introduced the Elevated Green Line South project, we invited students to Washington Park. So we took transportation from our offices, and we had Guion Foreman, who's the Elevated Green Line South community table representative, come out and give students a tour of the area. So we started at the 55th Garfield station, and then we kind of worked our way around just looking at the development by UChicago, some of the establishments that are there, all of the vacant land that was there. There's a sunflower garden that students got to see. And then also got to visit Boxville, which if you all haven't been to Boxville, please go. It's on 51st, right by the Green Line station right there. And it's a box cars full of restaurants and different stores and shops and stuff like that. So students really enjoyed that as well. We had about 16 students come out, 10 flip students, and then we also invited 6 students from another related project, the Local Square Neighborhood Association. Those were one summer Chicago interns. But overall, we had a really successful program this year. Michelle and I are thrilled to hopefully have an in-person event for next year. So that concludes our presentation, and we'll open it up for any questions.
Any comments or questions?
Let me
Thank
just
you both.
say thank you to the team too for doing an amazing job working through a pandemic, engaging students in a meaningful way. So we appreciate it.
Thanks. It's a great program.
It looks like Nina had her hand up quickly.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Just wanted to verbally congratulate Michelle and Courtney for another successful year doing the FLIP program. It is amazing. I think every year that I've lived in Chicago, I've been able to participate in some form or fashion, which is really exciting. But you guys really, you know, even with COVID, still having the students be engaged in this new virtual format. So I just want to commend you. And then also just CMAP again, when I was talking about doing the work and actually like seeing change in the community in multifaceted ways. Like this program is one way to bring attention to the planning field and just the built environment for a diverse group of future leaders, right? And whether they become planners or not, they have the ability to understand the built environment in a way that I didn't when I was growing up. So just wanted to verbally commend you all for the work that you're doing and keep it up.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9, the state and federal legislative updates, both Gordon and Laura.
And I think we have Anthony here because Gordon's flight got delayed due to some storms. So Anthony?
Thanks, Erin. I'll be really brief. As many of you already know, the governor has signed both the FY22 budget as well as the BIMP. We looked through the bills and that was included in your packet for today, along with a couple of other measures. So I'm going to skip that over just to say the governor has also signed a number of bills that are related to the work that we're doing directly here. Including an initiative by the Office of the Treasurer for infrastructure development proposals, as well as the IDOT's High-Speed Rail Commission. We are a member of that commission. Of note, legislation eliminating the IDOT local contribution for bike and pedestrian infrastructure and the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act were signed between delivery of the board memo and today. Just very quickly, the General Assembly plans to meet tomorrow. They met last week to go over the district maps following the release of new census data. They appear to be working on a new energy proposal, and we will update you with anything important that comes from that. Veto's session is scheduled to take place the final 2 weeks of October, and Gordon and I continue to do our meetings with legislators and caucus staffs and brief them on the relevant ON to 2050 research and special topics. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. If not, I'll go over to Tim.
Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, everyone. And Blanca, you can keep it on this slide, that first slide. So this morning for the federal legislative update, I'm just going to give a brief overview, like Erin said earlier, about the Senate passed reauthorization bill and a few things that we've been keeping an eye on and will continue to keep an eye on as this month progresses, and hopefully we get a bill out of DC. So the Senate passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act would provide an additional or above current baseline spending of $550 billion over the next 5 years from 2022 to 2026. As you can see from the chart on the top right there, of that $550 billion, 274 of that new spending would go to USDOT, nearly doubling the department's total budget authority over that 5-year time span. If you could go to the next slide, please. So that spending increase will correlate to increased spending levels across most, if not all, of USDOT's formula programs. For the region's core programs that CMAP administers, you could see here there are estimated increases of 32% for metropolitan planning and STBG or service transportation funding, 10% for CMAC, and then 76% for transportation alternatives. Next slide. So a few of the policy and programmatic changes that we wanted to highlight, since they would directly impact CMAP, are the inclusion of new housing language that was added to the metropolitan planning section of the bill, which would allow MPOs to better coordinate transportation planning with housing, including as a planning factor, and would also allow TMAs, or transportation management areas like our region with more than 200,000 population, to develop housing coordination plans. The bill would also increase surface transportation block grant eligibility to planning and construction of emerging technologies like Hyperloop, and would cover the construction of natural infrastructure to enhance resiliency. So now briefly, next slide, please. I'm going to go through some of the formula and then competitive programs that we'll be looking at. So the first one on there, the carbon reduction program, would provide $6.4 billion to states and includes a 65% sub-allocation, similar to how STBG funding is sub-allocated now. That would invest in projects that support a reduction in transportation emissions, such as public transit, freight mitigation, congestion pricing infrastructure, amongst other eligibility. The PROTECT program would provide $7.3 billion for states for resilient infrastructure investments. This also includes competitive fundings that MPOs would be eligible at a 100% federal share to develop resilience improvement plans to assess vulnerabilities for current and future weather events and natural disasters and changing climate conditions. Next up, the electric vehicle program would provide $5 billion in formula funding to states and $2.5 billion in competitive funding for states and regions. And when I say regions, I mean MPOs, local governments. So you can assume that that's what I'm saying throughout this. To build out, that funding would be to build out electric vehicle charging infrastructure, that competitive funding and formula funding. The last one on here, the Bridge Investment Program, would provide $27 billion in formula funding to states and $12.5 billion in competitive funding to states and regions. This also includes a 15% set aside of that formula funding for off-system local bridges. The next slide, a few of the competitive grant programs that we have on the horizon are a new congestion relief program that was championed and was a priority for Senator Duckworth, especially for regions like ours, over 1 million. That's where the eligibility is for this program for regions. And it would provide $250 million to regions to advance multimodal solutions to congestion. So that includes funding for congestion management systems, more congestion pricing infrastructure eligibility, and other incentive programs like, carpool, or other alternatives like that. The next program there, $1 billion for a Reconnecting Communities pilot program, would focus on projects around existing highways that were built through neighborhoods that have created barriers to mobility and economic development. And then the last one, $500 million for smart mobility demonstration grants to conduct demonstration projects focused on advanced smart city or community technologies and systems to improve transportation efficiency and safety. And then the last slide here on competitive programs. Next slide, yeah. So $500 million for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, that would provide $5 billion, as you see, for local Vision Zero efforts and plans. There's $500 million for Healthy Streets program for projects that improve resilience by doing things like focusing on mitigating urban heat islands, improving air quality, reducing stormwater runoff. We also have new funding for a railroad crossing elimination program that would provide $3 billion to improve safety at highway railway crossings. And lastly, the All Stations Accessibility Program that was championed by our delegation as well, especially Senators Duckworth and Congresswoman Newman. That would provide $1.75 billion over 5 years to upgrade the accessibility of legacy rail systems like the ones in our region specifically. And then my last slide, the next slide, next steps. As you can see, if this bill passes, there will be a lot of new formula funding, but also discretionary competitive funding opportunities for our region to take advantage of. The latest on timeline for passage in the House is the House passed a budgetary rule to start this reconciliation process that you may be following. I'm following it. So that reconciliation process is going to continue in the Senate. The Senate committees have until September 15th per the Senate Majority Leader to come up with what their reconciliation bill will look like. And then hopefully the House will vote on it either by or on September 27th, according to that budget vote that they took. One thing I did want to note, just in terms of the TIP process that we did a few months ago for transportation specific member projects, there is an effort to get those projects included in the reconciliation bill since they were not included in the Senate passed bill. So we'll be keeping an eye on that in our TIP as well, if that's impacted. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions regarding our legislative state and federal level?
Looks like Jim Healy has a question.
I was wondering if you have any indication whether the carbon reduction dollars or the reconnecting community dollars or the Safe Street dollars could be used for trails and connecting areas within our communities to our shopping areas, our business areas and stuff like that.
I could take a deeper dive and send that to you directly, just because those three programs are somewhat different or are different. But I would say the eligibility across those are pretty wide. So I can get that to you directly on those specific programs.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, is there any other business before the board? The meeting's open to the public. Any comments, Erin?
We received no notifications in advance of public comment.
Okay.
Anyone online want to make public comment now? Sounds like no.
Okay. Our next meeting is an important one. It's with the MPO Policy Committee. It's scheduled for Wednesday, October 13th. My gut is that this is not going to change in 30 days. Based upon what we're seeing statewide, certainly, as far as meeting in person. But we will update.
Yeah, I will share, Mayor Bennett, that we have reserved a conference room at the second floor of our building has a large conference center. So we will have a large enough room to accommodate social distancing of both committees if we are able to meet in person.
Okay, and I'm sure within a couple of 3 weeks or 3 weeks, certainly you'll reach out to see, based upon the conditions, whether or not there will be attendance in person or preferable virtual. So in either case, we will meet in October. I would ask the executive committee members that as soon as you get off this, we'll get on the GoToMeeting site for our meeting. And with that in mind, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move, Healy. Second.
Seconded. Erin, call the roll.
Mayor Bennett.
Aye.
Frank Beal. President Brawley.
Aye.
Mayor Darch.
Aye.
Paul Goodrich.
Aye.
Jim Healy.
Aye.
Nina Adamudia.
Aye.
Mayor Nope.
Yes.
President Reinbold.
Aye.
Mayor Rodering.
Aye.
Stephen Schaefer.
Aye.
Carolyn Schofield.
Yes.
Ann Sheehan.
Yes.
Matt Walsh. And Diane Williams.
Yes.
Motion
The
carries.
motion carries. Good to see everybody, and we'll see you within 1 month. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye all.